If you could be either God's worst enemy or nothing, which would you choose? We're the middle children of history. We have no special purpose or place, and unless we get God's attention, we have no hope of damnation or redemption. Which is worse, hell or nothing? Burn the museums. Wipe your ass with the Mona Lisa. This way, at least God will know your name.
Yes, God is noticing us as we become Jehovah's worst enemy, going beyond damnation and redemption into the eternal realm. God is noticing us as we, the middle children of history, gather once again in the desert of the real. Maybe there is no purpose or special place, but we know one thing as knowers of the unknown, the Gnostics. We know one thing, my beloved truth seekers. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just is. Especially when we've washed handfuls of red pills with milkshakes of gnosis. When we've been baptized in the rivers of Michael Jordan heroism. When the contact lens of Sophia has been placed over our third eye. Like Gotthold Ephraim Lessing said, a heretic is a man who sees with his own eyes.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
It's all part of the plan.
Welcome to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, formerly Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. As always, we broadcast from the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West, through the God above God, Dad King. Welcome to the machine, my son, and the means to escape it. Welcome to the gospel of Bill Hicks, Sid Barrett, and occasionally Russell Brand. Welcome, you modern-day Tom Sawyers, your mind not for rent by any god or government. You eternal soundtrack of the counterculture. We're raging against heaven for our misplaced childhoods and paradise is lost. We're sailing the seas of fate and in between the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. And we're burning those museums and wiping our ass with the Mona Lisa.
Ready your breakfast and eat hearty. But tonight, we dine in hell!
I am Abraxas, in his organic incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting in the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago. As a garage philosopher and hedge theologian, I hope you understand that I bring you ancient but perennial liberating blasphemy. Those contraband truths of the Gnostics through a literary prism. Because that's where authentic, unvarnished power is. That eternal gnosis. Our war is not a spiritual war, an ideas war, or a political war. Our war is an artistic one, and that's where our ultimate liberation lies. Paraphrasing St. Paul, our war is not against powers and principalities, but shitty art in high places.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrot. Nipples for men.
The meaning of life is to give meaning to a mechanistic, cold universe, regardless of what Tyler Durden contends.
How's that working out for you? What? Being clever?
And we do this through our imagination, our invention, and our myth-making. We will be victorious even as the hordes of hell and marketing gurus and religious medusas bear down upon us in the battlefields of the true seeker warrior. Like Albert Einstein once said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand. And like the great Colin Wilson once said, imagination should be not to escape reality, but to create it. To wit, in my witless banter, write your own gospel and live your own myth. Or as the pseudo-hipster saying goes, don't be the change you want to see in the world. Be the strange you want to see in the world.
1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
All this puffery on art and entertainment from yours falsely is very relevant to this week's sacrilege. As on this November 30th, the year of our Demiurge 2013, we discuss Gnostic themes in the Star Trek mythos. Even you Trekkies and true geeks might be truly surprised, but we won't cover the lens flare fake orgasm that was the last Star Trek movie, Into Darkness, even as J.J. Abrams further ruins the Star Wars saga as we speak.
Douchebag you are.
But you won't be surprised at the erudition and insight of our astral guest, my buddy, fellow Gnosticoi, and luster of Hypatia of Alexandria, Errol Isil. Errol is also the founder of the palatial band Sylvia Bliss, and has been on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio before, where he discussed Gnostic themes in rock music. For more information on Errol and Sylvia Bliss, please visit sylviablissband.com. That is SYLVI blissband.com. Not only does the band play some pleuromic music with talent on loan from the Aeons, it has got more occult themes than a Jay-Z video or an Olympic ceremony.
You shall know that God is God, and bow down to his will.
I'm not going to personally delve into Gnostic themes in the Star Trek mythos right now. And I know this remark probably just stopped you from standing underneath Atlas after a bout of tacos and black coffee.
I haven't got a brain.
But I will say it does make perfect sense when considering the creative, psychedelic, and science fiction attitude of the Gnostics. Chris Knowles calls the Gnostics history's first geeks, in their truest sense. And I say he's right. Chris also has some alarming articles on Star Trek and its relationship to Gnosticism and the esoteric in general at his blog, The Secret Sun. I highly advise you check them out. And this quote by Eric Davis certainly encapsulates why science fiction and Gnosticism have such a strong bond, beyond all my logorrhea on the show throughout 7 years. It goes. The Neoplatonists' ascent through the spheres, the Gnostic sudden awakening, the desert monk's rejection of the Elan Vital, is not simply a philosophical error or the mark of patriarchy, but is fired by an intensely lucid yearning of the highest goals, liberation.
Do you believe in fate?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
We don't need to expiate our crimes, but to discover and remember the way out of a false world created through no fault of our own. And this way out is way out. Gnostic texts crackle with a peculiar energy and almost sci-fi sensibility of alien gods and supramundane universes of light. Though not the first cosmic duelists, the Gnostics may have been the first spiritual off-worlders.
We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives.
As always, please support this Hobbit podcast in any way your daemon urges and Eidolon permits. For example, donations, buying me books, purchasing shows, or procuring virgins for sacrifices. Your support is essential. And thank you, you crazy diamonds and veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who continually support this show every week. You have made Gnostic Radio kill the orthodoxy star.
There is most definitely a hell. What? And you're all going to go there when you die.
I'd certainly like to give a shout out to Mythist Milwaukee for orchestrating my recent talk at the Swift event in, you got it, Milwaukee. I gave a 2-hour lecture on the power of myth and the Gnostic rebellion on reality. It was a very cool event with a lot of amazing freethinkers. Even you, Veda, my atheist activist Red Sonja. The Archons tried to stop me from the event by sending some tornadoes and heavy storms as I drove out of Chicago, but I made it like a rainbow in the dark. You can find the video of this lecture and other excellence at their website, mythistmilwaukee.com. And you can find more information on Swift at swiftnow.org. Great allies in the fight against Yaldi Baldi and his cosmic monkey shines.
God! Bing, 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 bing. Well, it was nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with the apocalypse. Oh, and by the way, you suck!
But enough of my drivel. Let us get beamed up to the interview with Errol Isil. Yes, God is finally noticing us as we become Jehovah's worst enemy. We, the Gnostics, going beyond damnation and redemption into the eternal realm, out of this terra damnata. And tell us why, Bones, we shouldn't ask God for his ID. Oh, here it is.
Brave souls, welcome.
Is this the voice of God?
One voice, many faces. Does this better suit your expectations?
I'll say too.
It is I.
It was not. The barrier stood between us, but we breached it.
Magnificent. You are the first to find me.
We sought only your infinite wisdom.
And how did you breach the barrier?
With a starship.
This starship, could it carry my wisdom beyond the barrier?
It could, yes.
Then I shall make use of this starship.
It will be your chariot.
Excuse me.
It will carry my power to every corner of creation.
Excuse me, I'd just like to ask a question. What does God need with a starship?
Bring the ship closer.
I said,
What does God need with a starship?
Chairman, what are you doing? I'm asking you a question.
Who is this creature?
Who am I? Don't you know? Aren't you God?
He has his doubts.
You doubt me?
I seek proof.
Jim, you don't ask the Almighty for his ID.
Then here is the proof you see.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure of being joined by Errol Isil, and we're going to be discussing a lot of wonderful heretical sundries, including Star Trek and science fiction and whatnot. How you doing today, Errol?
I'm doing good.
Well, thank you very much for coming on again on the show. And why don't we start with you? How did you become fascinated with Star Trek and science fiction in general?
I was a little kid. They were doing the reruns of Star Trek. I was born in the year that it came out, which was the same year that The Prisoner came out. Which Prisoner's probably my favorite show of all time, and then Star Trek's probably after Dollhouse, probably number like third or something. So I'm not a Trekkie, and I've never put on a costume or gone to a convention. But maybe that gives me a little different perspective, as one who's never put on pointed ears and walked around anywhere. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, oh yeah, and certainly Dollhouse and The Prisoner are probably two of the most Gnostic shows you could think of, so it seems like your fate was already destined. And we can talk about those two shows later on, but why don't we talk a little bit about Star Trek? What are some of the Gnostic themes you found in it, and maybe when you found them?
I think, first off, when I was in college, I had this roommate who was a Trekkie. And he pointed out that this is before The Next Generation came out, and he pointed out that a lot of the characters that they come across, a lot of the villains, were omnipotent beings. It's like every week it's a god. You got a god villain, and when they did come out with The Next Generation, there was some mention that the Q character was going to be like the all-encompassing, omnipotent bad guy. That they weren't going to have that kind of narrative going. So it wasn't going to be the same kind of stream of, they meet an overwhelming force and, how are they going to deal with it? Unless, of course, you count the Borg. But that's another string I could go off on. With the original series, when I was a kid, to me, really was the music that made it more action-packed than it actually was. It wasn't really, the Kirk swivels around his chair and then you hear flutes going, da-da, you know what I'm saying? So it just seemed like a lot of action, but really, it was a far more intellectual show. It was the intellectual show that I guess the counterculture generation was screaming for back in 66 and 67. But it was on a Friday night, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't think they got the crowd that they wanted. But unlike Fox, they didn't cancel it. It went on 3 years. But it's very unusual for a show to find new life in reruns, because usually you have to do 5 years before they'll rerun your show. Otherwise, they consider it an absolute flop. So that in itself should tell you something that there's kind of something going on there. So I discovered it during the early 70s, I guess, whenever they started rerunning the show. I watched it. Yay, Star Trek's coming on. It always came on around 6 o'clock. They kept rerunning the episodes, seen them, I don't know, dozens of times, it seemed like. Like I said, when I was in college, this friend of mine pointed this particular aspect out. And when I got into Hermeticism, I joined, I want to bring up Builders of the Adytum, BOTA, which was founded by a former head of the Golden Dawn, Paul Foster Case. This is a guy that should have you done shows on him before by any chance?
It's been mentioned here and there, but nothing you might say exhaustive.
Yeah, he's like reading, if there's a book he's got, just it's called The Tarot. Just That's the key to the wisdom of the ages. I happen to have the copy of it right here. And really, it's not much, because if you actually join the order and got the lessons, it goes even further. But if you look at it, it's like reading Jung on acid or something. I mean, it's really just loaded with the whole archetype. This color means this, and this figure means that. And if you stare at a Hebrew letter, it could change your consciousness in this way. I mean, it's real heavy duty stuff. And I've often kind of wondered, Crowley, seems to have gotten all the attention, and this Paul Foster Case guy somehow got overlooked. And I'm like, man, people need to check this guy out, because that's some really heavy duty stuff there. It will alter your consciousness. When I was in that order, and the rituals seem real kind of, at first you're like, what is this about? I was expecting, angels to come down from the sky and crazy stuff to happen. And nothing like that ever did. And I was like, man, what kind of occultism is this? But then it starts working on your mind, and that's the thing they kind of tell you, is like, don't expect. We all go in there thinking we're going to be mages when we come out, and then we realize that we're getting hit with something completely different. But as a child, I tend to like those oddball shows, and I was, It's kind of weird that we're discussing Star Trek the week before the big 30th anniversary of Doctor Who, or 50th anniversary.
Yes.
I got my sister-in-law that I just mentioned is English. And then her kids, they got a little bit of the accent. Even though they're in Philly, we're all on Doctor Who mania over here. And so I'm going to try to tie the two a little bit together, even though I'm going to focus on Star Trek here, by pointing out one of the favorite episodes of Trekkies, which is City on the Edge of Forever, by Harlan Ellison. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh yeah, very much.
It's not really a Gnostic episode, but it's a favorite. But it does kind of bring up something, kind of interesting with regards to people either believing in ancient astronauts, or that people from the future might be visiting us or something. Because in that particular episode, McCoy gets bumped, and I accidentally injected myself with some crazy stuff, and now I'm going to jump through a porthole in time. I don't know if you remember that. There was like this they were on this deserted planet, and he's giving this injection to this guy, and he kind of goes wild-eyed and jumps through a hole in time, a door in time, if you will, and changes the future. So they're all stranded on the planet because the Enterprise never existed. Yeah, so they have to go back, but they have to find the right moment. Turns out they're a month ahead of whenever McCoy landed during the Depression. And they discovered that there's this one woman that McCoy and Kirk both fall in love with, and Edith Keeler. I can remember that. Joan Collins played her. Hey. Anyway, but they got to let her die so that Hitler doesn't win the war.
Yes, I remember. That was great.
Yeah, but there's nothing saying that Hitler would have won the war anyway, because from what I've understood, the Russians kind of turned the tide of the war themselves back in 1942. So, but anyway, when Kirk and Spock go back to the Depression, they don't have a lot of technology to deal with. But so you see them with some vacuum tubes and things like that, and you're going, they had vacuum tubes back then? Really? That was a surprise. Like the same stuff in the back of your TV set. I learned about that when I was in high school, as I took electronics class, and was like, I was swapping out tubes left and right, and I was understanding why my Marshall amplifier was catching fire. I got to order tubes from Britain that they got from Russia. And that brings me to two guys I want to talk about real quick. You're familiar with Nikola Tesla and Leon Theremin, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Great figures in the alternative histories and sciences.
Oh, yeah, and they seem to have their own, they got a little bit of a mythology kind of developing, or maybe it's already developed around them. I saw David Bowie playing Nikola Tesla, and he, I don't want to say what movie it is, but he does something that you can't really imagine him doing. And I think that just adds to the mystique of these two guys, because they kind of literally, the documentarians paint these guys as being kind of out of their time, especially Leon Theremin, who laid the prototype for transistors, a lot of work with the vacuum tubes, what the scary RFID chip that everybody, they're going to plant us with chips and be able to track everywhere we go. Theremin was very big on trying to do things that you could do with electronics without the use of wires, such as television broadcasts and radio broadcasts and that sort of thing. And Theremin took, and here's how I'm going to tie it all in, Theremin took a radio and he turned it into an instrument that everybody knows today as the Theremin. Then a guy named Bob Moog comes along, and he at the age of 14 he creates his first Theremin. And Theremin is now working for the Russians. Well, he was born in Russia, so that's kind of how it happened. The Theremin became very popular in science fiction movies, especially those B movies from the 50s. You would hear these, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Those little.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, I'm sure to the audience back then it was real scary, but to us it sounds probably slightly comical. And which is probably why that original Star Trek theme, they did away with when they came out with new versions. They were like, we're not going to use that. But that is how I connect Theremin to Star Trek, is that theme song. It followed in with the horror movie sci-fi genre films as far as the use of that instrument. Of course, I think they did a better job with in Doctor Who, because when I listen to even the newer episodes of Doctor Who, I'm kind of still nostalgic for when Tom Baker was the Doctor, and you'd hear low note theremins and then those real echoey theremin sounds. And the theremin, of course, they were probably not using theremins then. They were probably using mini Moogs and Taurus pedals and things like that. I happen to have a pair of Taurus pedals, and I love to make crazy sounds with it. So you can make all those swooshing noises and all that. You can actually imitate like a police siren with the thing. It's neat to play with, but it takes you hours to dial in all those with those knobs. But of course, when Keith Emerson did it, when he brought those things out, that was when everybody went, "What the hell is that?" He had that big unit, and that was tied to a keyboard. It was basically a revised theremin. Basically, your first synthesizer unit originated from Moog and their attempts to transfer the theremin into some sort of new keyboard instrument, and that's where we are now. When Star Trek came out, you had that opening kind of ambiance, and then they'd have the fanfare, and then they go into that fanfare that had the theremin in it. Of course, it didn't sound near as good as the Doctor Who one, because it sounded like they were using feedback and echo, and it was like, yeah, that's how you. My introduction really to the theremin was 1976. That's when I really understood what a theremin was, because I went to see The Song Remains the Same, and I was a big Led Zeppelin fan. And I don't know, do you remember when they did A Whole Lot of Love with the theremin? Do you remember when Jimmy Page was playing that making all those sounds with the theremin?
No, God, it's been so long since I've watched the movie.
Yeah, well, he still pulls that thing out every now and again. Go back and see it. It's a hoot. Just to watch it. But Pink Floyd was really into that. The on the album Metal, you hear a little Doctor Who kind of theme on one of these dates.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
You might, if you catch it, you might. Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Anyway, getting back to Star Trek, I just talked about the opening theme, which of course they changed to the theme that you hear on the Next Generation, which was in the first movie. So you actually hear the theme in the first movie. For people who thought they heard that theme for the first time, yeah, it was actually in the first movie, and then it was in the fifth movie. So it had already been established. They dumped the Theremin altogether. I am kind of nostalgic for it as far as Doctor Who, but not so much with Star Trek. The thing with when I got into Hermeticism, getting back to Hermeticism, and kind of when I started to become aware of the Cathars and your show, for instance, I suddenly kind of snapped to the Gnostic themes that were on Star. It's like it was staring me in the face the whole time. You know what I'm saying? Especially after I read the Old Testament. Remember when I told you about that? I was 12 and I read the Old Testament.
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I was even then I was probably comparing some of the characters, the villains in the original Star Trek, the God of the Old Testament, to some of the characters that were in Star Trek. And specifically, there were certain episodes that struck me. Of course, one is Return to the Archons. How could you not miss that, right?
It's so obvious. Yes, it's a great. Yeah, you want to tell the listeners a bit of the plot? I mean, it's not like they just borrowed the word because it sounded cool, but it is about Archons.
It really kind of shook me up, especially growing up here in the South, as I've mentioned before. But Return of the Archons, they go to this planet where a spaceship called the Archon had crashed. So the people from the ship they called the Archons, the local populace did. And the local populace is governed by a godlike being known as Landru. And if you did not, are you of the body of Landru? They kept saying that, you of the body. And I remember thinking, where have I heard this you of the body stuff before? You know? It's just like, it's kind of like the whole are you reborn kind of thing. You know, are you of the body of Christ? You know, are you of the body of Landru? And they're like, of course, they try to adapt. They're like, yeah, sure, we're of the body of Landru, you know. Well, you act strange. Oh, we're from another town, you know. So there's this guy Landru, and then they have these enforcers. I guess you could call them Archons. I can't remember their names off the bat. But anyway, they have these enforcers to make sure that everybody keeps in line and is of the body. They do a brainwashing technique of the local populace. So you have a certain amount of questioning of identity, free will, and whatnot. Right in that episode alone, because people don't have free will. They're basically they've given themselves over to Landru to provide all their needs for them. And unfortunately, he's a little bit of a tyrant. And at the end of the episode, we find out that Landru isn't even a person at all. He's a computer. He's a computer created by the original Landru. And I guess he built it kind of on some level for his own ego.
Yeah, and of course, that's a great theme of the Gnostics, that we have no free will. How do you find your free will? Kind of reminds me in Alan Moore's V for Vendetta, where the computer that controls everything is called fate.
Yeah. Oh, I love that movie. Whenever somebody comes over, I'm like, you want to watch a movie? How about V for Vendetta? You know.
Great comic book, yeah. So yeah, the Star Trek, that one is incredible. Do we know, or haven't had a chance to research it, do we know who wrote it? Was Roddenberry familiar with the old myths?
He had, I honestly don't know. He had a lot of writers. And some of these writers had written for Twilight Zone. They had written for probably Outer Limits. And they were probably, Theodore Surgeon, he wrote one of the episodes too. They had a lot of people kind of come in and out. Richard Matheson wrote one of the episodes. I mentioned him before. He did A Stir of Echoes. I think you kind of like that movie a little bit. He also wrote, before I had mentioned what was it? I had mentioned the box that was redone by Richard Kelly. It was originally called Button Button. Now it's a Richard Matheson story. Richard Matheson, he did an episode called The Enemy Within. And what I find kind of Gnostic about that is that and maybe it's probably just me, but they have a transporter incident and they separate Kirk into the good Kirk and the bad Kirk. And the good Kirk can't seem to make decisions, which and he's kind of weak because they really kind of show him up as like the super ego, if you will, and the bad Kirk is the id, because the id knows, hey, I'm hungry, I got to eat. You know what I'm saying? So you see him eating and drinking, getting drunk, and trying to get it on with Yeoman Rand, and but he's that part of the other Kirk that needs to make the decisions, the life and death calls or whatever that they need. I found it interesting that there was the the id part that they kind of made stronger, really. So it's a good episode if you look at it from that perspective. If you look at it as good Kirk, bad Kirk, although they kind of joked about that when remember when William Shatner made that "Get a Life" statement on Saturday Night Live. And they're like, oh, he's just pretending to be the bad Kirk from The Enemy Within.
God bless those Trekkies.
Yeah. Other episodes. I mentioned the Squire of Gothos before. Oh, that one really kind of hits the nail on the head, because they deal with these creatures, this guy who's on a planet, and at least he says he's looking through a telescope, and he's basically looking back at time at the Earth, and it's like around the time of the French Revolution. He kind of acts a little strange. They kind of chalk it up to eccentric, but by the end of the episode, he throws little temper tantrums. They smash like he's got a computer or something, and they think, okay, we've disarmed him, now we can go. Like they're trapped there. Oh, we disarmed him, we can go. So they beam back to the ship, and they try to get away. And then the planet is chasing them. The Gothos is chasing them. The planet of Gothos is on a chase of the Enterprise. And Kirk gets pissed, and he goes back down to the planet, and they have a little duel, and Kirk breaks his sword, and he throws another tantrum, and he slaps the guy in the face and goes, you got a lot to learn about everything. At that point, Kirk kind of realizes he's kind of dealing with a child. He's dealing with this omnipotent being who's kind of like a child. And the next thing you know...
Well, that's like Sackless, the childish god of the Gnostics.
Very much so. And then you have these two, parent figures show up, and they're like, you have to learn to play better with your pets, Trelane. His name was Trelane. And they were like, you have to learn to play better with your pets. If you don't behave yourself, we're not going to allow you to make any more planets. So there's kind of a moment going, make any more planets? Hold on a second. Which planets did he make?
Our reality.
Exactly. So they kind of throw that out there that, maybe our planet might have been one of his creations, and he's, like you said, Soklos. Exactly. The Gangsters of Triskelion. Oh, that's a good episode.
Wait, before we get to that one, Errol, do you think this Trelane was sort of a precursor of Q?
It absolutely was, because if you go on YouTube, you look up Trelane, you look up Q, in one sentence, and you got John Delancey saying he based kind of his character on Trelane. And then there are other people who are trying to make Trelane part of the Q Continuum. This gives me a good opportunity to bring out something kind of interesting. Apparently, there was one book written focusing on the Q character, and oh man, can I get to an episode real quick?
Sure, go ahead, keep it going.
Let me skip to an episode called Errand of Mercy. This was kind of like the episode that explained the whole Cold War thing between the Klingons and the Federation. How, basically these guys are going to war, and they land on the planet Organia, and they're like these people seem kind of medieval for some reason, but not too. I guess they were relevant enough to try to win them over. The Klingons are there trying to win them over, and Federation's there trying to win them over, and they kind of mistake these people for just peasants basically. All of a sudden the war breaks out between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and then all of a sudden all their weapons and all their if you push this torpedo button, it's going to burn your hand. All of a sudden everything goes hot, and they got, all of a sudden they're throwing their phasers out of their hands, going what the hell, and it's like. It was the Organians that did this. So they're like, we can't allow you to destroy yourself. In fact, down the years, you might even become friends, which is that right there is a little bit of a foreshadowing, if you will. I think Roddenberry had it in his head all along that he wanted to get the Klingons and the Federation together in the Cold War. And this is relevant because the Organians, apparently Q, he talks about the Q Continuum got into and this isn't in any of the stuff, this is in some novel, got into a war with another set of omnipotent beings. And they appealed to the Organians, but the Organians said the Q were basically too immature for them to make first contact with them. However, with the Federation, first contact, 5,000 years. So in other words, they were 5,000 years from Kirk's time or whenever they were going to make first contact with the human race or something like that. But the Q still not ready. So that's why I had to skip to that. Let me talk about that real quick so I could tie the Q in with the Organians, because I found that rather hysterical.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the Organians were probably the first benign sort of omnipotent beings that they came across. This kind of gets me back to the gangsters of Triskelion. These guys aren't malevolent, they're just kind of, well, when you finally see them, they're just like three brains kind of sitting on a platter, but they clearly have, they outlived the need for bodies or whatever. They just are, they're just that powerful, but they're fixated on having these little gladiator sports with different species and stuff. And so Kirk, makes a bargain with the devil, if you will. And then when I see these three brains now, I go Sawclaw, Samael, and Yaldabaoth.
Yeah, no kidding.
And they're like, 20 quattros, no, 30, I'll bet 30 on Kirk, or whatever. They're basically, it's all playing dice, They say God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, maybe he does.
If there's money to be gained.
Yeah. That kind of stuck out in my head. That whole thing with, wait a second. This game society Triskelion takes on a whole new meaning. And there were a lot of episodes that had Garden of Eden kind of, there was of course the one episode nobody wants to acknowledge, The Way to Eden, and it's pretty terrible. It's pretty bad. Space hippies, But they had another episode called The Apple, and they go to this planet. It seems like a paradise. The people there are very happy. They're white people, but they kind of look like they might have blackface on. Not too cool. And they're being tended to by their own god, Baal. And they go and they show them Baal, and it's like this serpent-headed cave. Do you remember that one?
Barely.
It's like it's like a cave, but the cave looked like it had like two ruby eyes. It looked like a kind of like a serpent. Sometimes those eyes would glow when it was, Val is angry, and so it looked for the away team or whatever you call them. They look like it looks like a paradise. It looks like the people are happy, everything's cool and all that. But for the away team, Val is throwing, thunderbolts at them, and they're getting hit by vegetation, and they're encountering that. The planet doesn't seem to. This particular planet doesn't seem to like them too much. So ultimately, and they're trapped there. So Val teaches. There's this one guy. He's got there's always a prophet, right? There's always got to be some dude, and he's the selected guy to have these little things implanted in his head, little horns. I was telling somebody about the horns that Moses had, and that you see in some iconography, Michelangelo, in some churches and whatnot. I always get a kick out of that myself. But this guy teaches them how, now Val has taught them how to kill. They didn't know how to kill before. They seem like, you know what I'm saying? It just seemed like a paradise, fool's paradise, I guess. It's always a fool's paradise, isn't it?
Always too good to be true. If it's that good, it can't be real,
Yeah. Well, they destroy Val, and when they get back to the ship, they promise to, help the people live without Val. When they get back to the ship, Spock makes a comparison of Kirk, not directly, but kind of indirectly to Satan, because he basically got him kicked out of their little paradise with Val. And then, of course, and this is kind of a weird moment, but Kirk, says, anybody around here look like Satan? Kind of a little jab at Spock there. And Spock's like, I don't recall anybody bearing that description, no, So it was kind of.
And, of course, there is the scene in, I'm already drawing a blank from the movie where they actually meet God himself.
Yeah, the Final Frontier. This is when everybody's off to sea.
That's probably why I forget it was such a dreadful movie. It's one of the worst.
Yeah, but it's starting to become kind of a favorite for amongst the atheist set because, well, that line, why does God need a starship? That thing is just so.
Are you going to ask God for his ID?
Yeah, what are you going to do? Ask him for his ID? Exactly, that's hysterical. And Spock's like, yeah, that's a good question. Why does God need a starship? So they both get blasted and by little like lightning bolts, of course. And then God asks McCoy, "Do you doubt me too?" And he says, "I doubt any God that would harm his children," or something like that. Well, you haven't read the Old Testament, Bones, have you?
Yeah, exactly. He showed his love with his fists all the time.
Yeah,
that's what he did. Good alcoholic parent.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would expect God to. If I met God, at least the Old Testament God, that's exactly how I would expect him to behave. Anyway, I want to kind of point out something first. When they filmed the first pilot, they had a different crew. Major Barrett, who became Mrs. Roddenberry, was the first officer. Spock was, I don't know, a lieutenant or something, and it was Christopher Pike. And that was in the first pilot, so they had a different crew and a kind of different vibe going on. More women in miniskirts than you had in the second. Anyway, they didn't like it. They didn't like that first pilot. So they got the opportunity to go back and do a second pilot. And guess who helped them do a second pilot? Guess who said try again? Gave Roddenberry a second chance.
Who was that?
Lucille Ball.
Oh, really? Of all people?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a Desilu production. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, huh? And I mentioned that because my wife had bought, she saw like a $2 bin or something, and she bought this 2 DVD pack of Lucille Ball episodes from the 60s. Not I Love Lucy, but some of the Lucy show from the 60s. And some of those episodes are pretty, from our standards even, they would probably be considered kind of subversive. You know what I mean? Michelle Bachmann would have a fit. Very, she works as a secretary and she can't afford money to fix your bathroom. And you know what I mean? It gets right down to the working man's ordeal. And yeah, Lucy she wasn't the ditzy redhead that she played out to be at all. She was clearly a pretty bright woman. Gave them the second chance, and the pilot episode was Where No Man Has Gone Before. That's the second pilot. And in this one, they go through this barrier, and 6 people die, and two were injured. And the 2 that were injured, they were all hit like in their psychic center. I don't know, pineal gland, who knows what it is. But basically, all their psychic senses, start to come alive. One of them not until the end of the show. It was like Kurt's best friend all of a sudden is burning through a book in a matter of seconds, and got telekinetic powers and the whole bit, and and is basically declaring himself a god. And I guess power corrupts. To me, it's only slightly Gnostic in that kind of aspect. Is here's a guy who just got juiced, and he's running around declaring himself a god and killing whoever he wants and all this. And Kurt ends up burying him so many feet under when I guess he's weakened in the battle or something. It was a good episode, and is it Gnostic? I don't know. It definitely has that power corrupts kind of theme to it. I think when you deal with a lot of episodes like this, it aired right around the same time as Charlie X. That was an interesting one where this kid was raised by some sort of advanced beings with same kind of powers, and then they feel like, well, he needs to be with his own kind. He's a human being. He needs to be with humans. So they place him with humans. He's a teenager, and he lashes out like a teenager and hurts people. And then the aliens come back and say, well, I guess that didn't work, and take him away. No, I was just going to say that these 2 episodes, they were aired right back to back with each other, and it seemed like they had kind of the same theme as far as power corrupting or just like I said, there's all these omnipotent, all these super powerful beings that they keep running into. The Menagerie was they redid the Cage into a 2-parter, the only 2-parter, and this one you might kind of like, because this is kind of one of the first ones where they have they're messing with your head, and you're basically living out Captain Pike experiencing these scenarios, these alternate reality scenarios. They're messing with his head. But when you're watching this, you're actually watching it through the prism of Kirk and Spock and a couple other guys, and it's Spock's being court-martialed because he tried to kidnap the Enterprise and take Captain Pike to Talos 4, to the planet Talos 4. So right in the middle of it, Spock says, well, what you're seeing, these images are being beamed from Talos 4. So they're like, holy moly, So you're seeing everything that Captain Pike goes through, and then you find out that it's, the evidence that Spock is presenting is coming from I guess what would be the enemy, I don't know. But at the end, they were trying to see if Captain Pike and I don't know the name of the female character, Vina. I think her name was Vina. There was a divine syzygy going on, from my perspective. If you think of Pike as kind of the old hero, Vina would be Sophia or that like James Bond's woman that helps him kill the bad guys or whatever. She's kind of his second hand as he's going through these little trials that the Talosians are putting him through. And at the end, you see that her ship had crashed. She's malformed, and of course, in the future, Captain Pike is now malformed. So then it ends with them saying, well, Talosians are asking for Captain Pike to come back to his love, which that's kind of romantic, I think, because you have Kirk kind of like looking at the pictures of the fantasy Pike and the fantasy Vina, kind of walking into the caves of Talos 4, like, oh, they lived happily ever after. Hey, we're all suckers for the happily ever after, right? especially when one of them's in a wheelchair and the other one's kind of, you know. But to go on the virtual reality thing a little further, you find out at the end that there was no court martial and the characters disappear and it's just Kirk, Pike, and Spock there. That's all he, you know. Like, okay, yeah, they get a command in from Starfleet. Yeah, they can take Pike back to Talos 4. So that show kind of introduced the kind of virtual reality in that sense. And then there was Spectre of the Gun. I hope you don't mind me skipping because this one is really probably one of my favorites because it introduced me to kind of the Old West characters of, you know, the fight, the gunfight. I didn't know about the gunfight of the OK Corral until I saw the Star Trek episode. You know, that was my introduction.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and their cat. What happens is they come across these aliens that clearly they're advanced aliens, not omnipotent beings, but advanced enough to create a virtual reality. And the only thing they had missing in Spectre of the Gun was Kirk and Spock looking into a mirror and seeing dirt and bullshit on the sides of their face or something to make them look like they're really grungy coming out of the pastures or something. It's kind of like that line from Monty Python. How do you know how do you know he's a king? He doesn't know shit all over him, you know. Yeah. So that's probably the only thing missing is seeing them all, look in a mirror and see some dirty cowboys, you know. But anyway, they take to the roles, they're in this virtual reality and they're thinking it's all real. They're like, this is all real and this is history, and they actually feel like they got to play out their part, but they're trying to avoid playing out their part because that means them dying. Chekhov, he gets killed, and then they realize, hey, wait a second, he's Billy Claiborne, and Billy Claiborne didn't die at the OK Corral, and it's like, oh, so maybe we can change things. And what does changing things mean? You're gonna beat the Earps? Well, so. Of course, Spock doesn't say anything about, well, my quick draw skills with the pistol, from a holster ain't too good, Captain. You kind of think that, that's kind of what they're implying there. Of course, Bones, who's he gonna shoot? But they got what they have. The way they get out of it is interesting. Remember this is the 60s here. It's not like every day we got a Matrix or the 13th Floor or man, I can think of a half a dozen movies that deal with virtual reality or Gnostic thing. The Gnosticism's coming. It's coming full force right now, and that's at least I'm seeing it. I'm seeing a lot of movies now that have something that's kind of reminds me of that. There's a little bit of Gnosticism in this.
Oh yeah, very much so. I agree.
It didn't used to be that way. It was always clear lines of this is the kid gone wrong, and here's the cop that's going to shoot him down, and nobody cares what happened to that kid to get into that place in the first place. How did you become the bad guy? Well, I was really abused as a child. We don't get it. Now we kind of are like we want depth to our villains. In fact, I was rooting for the Joker when Heath Ledger played him. I was like, yeah, he's right. How can you control everything, Batman? I was telling people, I didn't like how fascist Batman came off in that movie. I came out of that movie going,
yeah, I think that's the point. He is a fascist, at least in this incarnation, this reboot.
It was wonderful. It was kind of a wonderful thing, and I think when they did the Dark Knight Rises, they kind of, I don't know. I think he really kind of wanted to shed himself of that fascist element of himself. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into that. But yeah, I thought Christopher Nolan did an excellent job, and I couldn't be happier. It makes the old movies to me just kind of hard to watch now. Just oh god, Christopher Nolan did so good. This is really pathetic. It's kind of like people who still find pleasure in watching Independence Day or Top Gun. It's like, are you serious? I mean,
yeah, no kidding.
I thought those movies were. I thought Top Gun was. I thought Independence Day was funny, but I thought Top Gun was pretty pathetic. But there's a whole story I can tell you about conversations I've had about Top Gun and, latent homosexuality and things like that. The character.
Oh, yeah, even my 16-year-old daughter noticed it when she watched it. She's like, whoa, Dad, this movie. I'm like, oh, yeah.
I had a friend who did the same thing. He's like, yeah, I haven't seen this movie in 20 years, and I just watched it, and I think it was gay, man. Why do
They even have a drinking game. You drink every time there's a homoerotic scene or hinting or something, and you can get pretty drunk.
Yeah, and it's a very macho. It's a very macho film at the same time, which should not be surprising. Remember the Village People? They all dressed up in very, they had the cop and the biker and, and the construction worker and yeah, okay. There's some machismo there, and so I don't fault. I'm not bigoted or anything. I'm just pointing out, hey, but it's war. There is that. There is kind of that theme that you see, especially in history. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar was by, Richard the Lionhearted. It kind of goes with a little bit with the territory, I think. I don't want to say that everybody, who gets an award. You know what I'm saying, though. With Spectre the gun, Spock has to put the mind meld on them to get them to realize that they're in a false reality. Because there's the doubt. Well, it seems real. It all seems real. How do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, how do I escape the Matrix? There's no red pills for them. All they got is a Vulcan there to give them a mind meld. It's like, well, there's no red pills. I guess I'll go with the mind meld. Hey, speaking of and this is kind of interesting. And later on in the when you get into the Enterprise, there was a show called Star Trek Enterprise, and they imply that the Vulcan version of AIDS and I guess to a lesser extent homosexuality is Vulcans who can mind meld, because apparently it was contagious or something. So that kind of like, well, wait a second, weren't they mind melding in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock? Didn't they? Like everybody was mind melding by then, But apparently in some 80 years before Kirk and Spock come along, it was taboo, to mind meld. That was, I don't know what episode that is. I didn't watch those episodes faithfully. I didn't watch the spinoff series real faithfully. There's way more. I can go on. I can go on and on. A Wolf in the Fold. Now a lot of people kind of go, well, when I was a kid, that's like, oh, Captain Kirk versus Jack the Ripper. Well, then they say, well, really, it's like humanity carrying its evil, almost like luggage into outer space, like we brought this thing along with us. And, it's an entity that feeds on fear and death, mostly fear, but I guess the swallowing of the food is the death. So this thing is with us. This thing is living amongst us. It's I think this is another analogy to our demiurge. It's not specifically drawn out that way, but they actually say, well, this is like our evil personified, the personification of humanity's evil, if you will. And it's influencing us. It wants fear and it wants death. And I often comment about war being like being kind of like human sacrifice. And here in Texas, every time we execute somebody, I feel like it's a human sacrifice. Not because I want to say anything, make any kind of statement about the death penalty. The way Texas goes about it, because we just execute everybody.
Yeah, it's a huge ceremony, and it is. It somehow liberates the population, which it doesn't. But that's another subject.
Well, yeah, and it seems like there are too many cases where, wow, this guy might have been there. There's at least a couple. There's like 2 or 3 cases where it's like, yeah, that person was innocent, but they don't want. Of course, our government won't say it.
Nope.
So yeah, Wolf in the Fold. That's a good one. There's definitely a demiurge archetype I feel in that character. Day of the Dove. You have this this kind of energy plasma that enters the ship. The Enterprise. They rescue a handful of Vulcans. The rest of the ship gets cut off, and there's an equal number of not Vulcans, excuse me, Klingons. There's an equal number of Klingons and Federation people on the Enterprise, and for some strange reason, they're mad at each other and they want to kill each other, and they haven't noticed that their phasers have turned into swords. I'm sitting there going, "Hey, what's up with these dimwits, man? Your phaser just turned into your sword, and you just keep on fighting." It's like, where's your brain? That one definitely deals with free will. I mean, they're getting played with by this thing that's floating around the ship, who's feeding off of the hate and the bloodlust, and so they kill each other, and the thing is healing them, and they kill each other some more, heal, death heal. Mortally wound heal, I guess. I don't know. But this goes on, and of course, Kirk has to be the one that kind of snaps too, and go, "Hey, wait a second, we're getting played." And finally, and this thing is like, every time you see it, you're kind of like wondering how come nobody notices it, because it's kind of this kind of red and white ball floating in the, in the decks and stuff. And like, does nobody notice that red thing up in the corner? What's up, So finally, they know once Kurt finally notices it, gets the Kang. Oh, the actor that played Kang just died like a couple of months ago when we first talked about doing this episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of a weird synchronicity. And his wife, says, yeah, there's some entity messing with this. And they're having a fight in the engineering room, and Kirk points up to it, and he's like looking at it, and he's like, realizing that they're being played. So he's like, everybody drops their swords, and they start, laughing at the thing and telling it to go away. Good episode. Actual fighting going on, the censors are always worried about too much violence on TV, so it was like, they're not really parrying too hard, I guess. When they're doing the sword play, it's kind of light, it's not too, you don't actually see anybody get out.
Right, but plenty of miniskirts to make up for it.
Oh yeah. I was sad in the episodes that didn't have Yeoman Rand, let me tell you. That was a good one, and I felt like that entity or whatever seemed to, like, once again fit into that puppet master role. The human beings being played, being manipulated. There's the question of the whatever metaphysics you get out of this particular show, and it's there, even though I kind of dismissed it when my wife had given me a book on the metaphysics of Star Trek, and I was like, I'm not going to read this. For one thing, it doesn't have the word Gnostic anywhere in the index, so I was just like, well, but it did mention, the sense of identity that gets played, your sense of identity getting played with, and of course your memory and your will, your free will, definitely. There's a lot of times when the free will just totally gets overridden by some other being, some other entity. So they definitely play on that theme. So is Star Trek Gnostic? Yeah, I think a lot of the original series episodes were. Not really the next generation. I don't really see it except in maybe in Q. There was one episode in the Next Generation where they create a Moriarty who knows that he's in a false reality and wants them to find a way to get him off the holodeck. Do you remember that? That was like a second or third episode.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that touched on I guess that Gnostic theme of, hey, we're trapped here. How do we get out? And getting back to my days in BOTA and Paul Foster case and the Hermeticism that we were engaged in, it did kind of come out that we were kind of trapped in some sort of prison, if you will. I mean, not specifically, but there was a sense that, you know, our minds were, our brains are actually like receivers, and we're really, our minds exist in another dimension or whatever, you know, that we're actually projecting our thoughts into our bodies, that our brain matter is actually somewhere else. And it is what's being held prisoner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Gary Lachman talked about it's our brain. It's what fragments and detains consciousness for continuing or expanding. It's definitely out there in occultism.
And they get you to experience it, and that got me to leave the order. And then when I found your show, I was like, man, this is right. This is exactly what I experienced. This sense of being in a prison. I felt like I was in a prison. I felt like this prison was like drowning in water, and I was like, how do I get out? And when I heard the word individuate, I was like, that's it. And that's what individuation to me means. It means escaping from the prison. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
The show's choir.
I mean, for me, it wasn't really meant, that part of, I mean, everything else we can talk about as myth and story and all this, but this was like an actual kind of sense of experience that I had. And I became more aware of it, you know, when I would get in the car and I would drive, and I'd go from one place to another, and I wouldn't even remember driving. And I was like, that's because my subconscious, or, you know, my id, or the mass mind, my bored mind, if you will, just takes over. And I'm actually probably a better driver when I'm not paying attention to anything. Exactly. When I'm actually conscious of everybody, I start seeing all the stupid stuff they're doing, you know, and I get scared. But so it's kind of a double-edged sword to be actually to actually individuate, to actually be separated from it. Kind of scary. It can be scary in itself. Gnosis is not it's a double-edged sword. It's nice. It's nice to get out of it and all that. I guess that's why some people feel ignorance is bliss, and then there are those of us who were like, ignorance is the mother of all evils, you know?
Exactly. But anyway, Earl, I think that's all the time we have today. We definitely need to get you back so we can maybe tackle Doctor Who and Josh Whedon's Dollhouse, which you and I have talked about before in the past. But I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte.
Absolutely.